If I was gonna buy a Moonwatch, an Omega Speedmaster Professional, this would be the watch. To be clear, I'm not going to buy one, but if I did, this would be it, but I'm not. And that combination of statements makes about as much sense as you think it does. Anyway, white dial Speedmaster, y'all.
Yeah.
Let me start by saying I'm not looking for trouble. I'm not a Speedmaster collector or an expert or any kind of authority on the watch. I might say some things about the Speedmaster which are incorrect. And being incorrect about the Speedy, especially the Moonwatch, is like insulting someone's religion. A religion where someone makes prayers to a dot over the number 90 and where 10 days of fasting is the only atonement for pointing your feet in the direction of Buzz Aldrin. See, now I've upset the nerds. But I do think the Speedy deserves respect, maybe not reverence, but respect. It's one of the most famous, most recognizable watches ever made, and it's not bad looking either. And the only reason I have these watches down in my video dungeon is thanks to local collector Jim, who just got this white Speedy days ago, and Jim didn't hesitate to loan it to me, which makes me question his commitment to watchaholism. The Moonwatch, this type of watch, the first watch to be worn on the moon, it's historical, it's interesting, and I like that it mostly has looked the same for decades. I said mostly. I know there have been dozens of subtle changes and revisions and reversions, but overall, yeah, it's pretty much the same. Except now this steel, regular production Speedmaster Professional with a white dial that just came out a few weeks ago. There have been lots of white dial Speedmasters before. You'd think, based on the reaction to this watch, that this has never been done before, and that's only kinda sorta true. If we're talking about white dial Speedmaster Professionals, there have been Alaska Project watches, several of them, the silver dial Snoopy, the albino Moonwatch that was made for the Italian market, and there's currently a white gold Speedmaster Professional with a white dial that can be all yours for only $55,000. You'd be losing money if you didn't buy this watch. But this right here, this is the first time there has been a regular production steel Moonwatch with a white dial. If I'm wrong about that, let me have it in the comments. I'm sure you were planning to anyway. You see, these two watches, these two current Speedmaster Professional Moonwatches are exactly the same except for the dial. That's the only difference. The case, bezel, movement, bracelet, all the same. And what it all is. A steel watch that's 42 millimeters across, 13.2 millimeters thick, and 47.5 millimeters long. It has 20 millimeter lugs, uses a sapphire crystal on both the front and back. There is no Hesalite crystal option for this white dial Moonwatch. It's water resistant to 50 meters and it weighs 140 grams on the full bracelet. It uses the manually wound coaxial master chronometer 3861 movement. The list price for this watch is $8,100. That's $100 more than the black dial version. Maybe that's because this dial is more expensive to make, or maybe because they just want to charge you more. We'll talk about the dial soon, but first, what is this like on the wrist? The Apollo 11 mission, the mission that first landed on the moon, was designed to cover 240,000 miles of travel around the moon, to the moon, and back home. That's over 15 billion inches, but more importantly, that's 2.17 billion evans, where an evan is a unit of measurement that is equal to 7 inches. And an evan also happens to be the circumference of my wrist, 7 inches. Why NASA doesn't measure distance in evans is baffling, and it's probably the reason we haven't returned to the moon in decades. Okay, anyway, there's always this debate about the diameter of the Moonwatch. The 42 millimeter measurement includes the crown guards. If you just measure the bezel, which is what we usually do on most watches, this is a 40 millimeter watch. And the 47.5 millimeter length is more in line with a 40 millimeter watch than a 42 millimeter watch. However you like to measure girth, this feels great on my 1 evan wrist. Again, that's 7 inches for those of you not up on the latest sciences. This new Speedmaster bracelet makes the watch wear a little lighter and a little smaller than it used to, and that's because it tapers 5 millimeters from 20 millimeters at the lugs to 5 millimeters at the bracelet. That's got a more vintage feel than some previous Moonwatches, and I like this. It also has an adjustment system built into the clasp. It's not great. I think we should expect and demand more from Omega. It has only 2 positions, and you have to take the watch off to adjust it, and it's not really easy to do either. But of course, with 20 millimeter lugs, you can put this on a lot of different straps, and I think the white dial looks better on more straps than the black dial. Or maybe that's just because I really like white dial sport watches. find white dials with black hands and markers to be more legible. I think that's partly because there's always less reflection from the crystal with a white dial watch. Or rather, you will see less reflection. That's because there is literally more light coming from the dial through the crystal and to your eyes, more than with the black dial. See, sciences. NASA, call me. And this is a pretty cool white dial. I like this dial a lot. Omega calls this a lacquer dial. That's why it's glossy, it's reflective. It's also a stepped dial. In the insular and troubling Omegaverse, a step dial means that the dial has this edge, this step, towards the chapter ring. And that gives this dial more depth than a flat dial. And that's another thing I like about this dial. The depth is more noticeable than on a dark watch. On a white surface, shadows are more noticeable. So even though both dials are exactly the same, they both have the same kind of topography, you just see more of that topography on the white dial watch. And there's some additional depth on the white dial because it has applied markers where the black dial has painted lume markers. These polished, applied markers are good, I like them, but there is a downside, and it's that because these are applied metallic markers, there is less lume on the white dial watch compared to the other Moonwatch. And honestly, the lume application is the only thing I prefer about the black dial Speedy. Everything else I prefer about this white dial watch. Especially like the red text and the red tip of the seconds hand. That red does so much for this watch, for me, for my brain ball. The red text on the dial is something that I think was missing from all the previous limited edition white dial Moonwatches. Splash of color, am I right? The 3861 movement is a pretty cool thing. It's manually wound just like every other Moonwatch, but unlike nearly every Moonwatch in history, it uses Omega's coaxial technology that was originally developed by George Daniels. This means there's less friction in the escapement, which should reduce the need for servicing. It also means that this watch can be certified as a master chronometer by Metas. Master chronometer means that this watch has been tested and is accurate to plus 5 seconds per day or better. No minus, just plus, meaning that this thing should never run slow, and that's kind of amazing. Included in the Metas certification is a water resistance test. Now, I've mentioned this in other videos, and I'm going to bring it up here again because this is important and interesting and a little crazy. Omega says that during the Metas testing, watches are submerged in water and pressure tested for their listed water resistance rating. On the Omega website, it says, an Omega watch that is water resistant to 30 meters can be worn for swimming with a vigorous movement at depths of up to 30 meters underwater for extended periods without restriction. The Moonwatch is water resistant to 50 meters, and Omega says that yes, you can swim at a depth up to 50 meters with this watch. Now, you can't operate the pushers safely, but you can actually swim. And this water resistance statement has been reconfirmed by the VP of product at Omega. 50 meters means 50 meters. So congratulations to all of you who own new Speedmasters. You now have a dive watch. And I've said it before, and I'll continue to say it, I'm not really a Speedmaster guy, and specifically, I'm not a Moonwatch guy. I have nothing against the moon. In fact, I'm a big fan, and same with NASA, big fan. But Omega has just so over-marketed the whole first watch on the moon thing. I find it a little off-putting. It's a little gross to me. But when I look at this watch in the absence of marketing, if that's even possible, and even in the absence of the Apollo 11 mission, I see the appeal of this, especially now with the white dial. I really like how this looks. This is currently my favorite Moonwatch, and now we are one step closer to a Moonwatch I would buy. A full lume dial Moonwatch. That would look great, and it would really upset some collectors, so win-win.